Hi everyone, my name is Gabriel and this is the Hour of the Raven, your channel for everything Ravenloft, RPG, Dungeons and Dragons and horror. Today we are going to unveil the secrets of vampires, the thirsty undead who roam the night feeding on the blood of the living. Although these creatures of the night are classic Dungeons and Dragons villains, in the Ravenloft campaign setting, vampires received great attention and development in order to become unique and complex opponents. The main book with information about these creatures is a Von Richten Guide to Vampires, a deep study of the blood-drinking undead, and the first in a series of scholar tomes about the horrors that inhabit the lands of the mist. This video will not be focused on game mechanics, but will be directly inspired by Ravenloft's old campaign setting books about vampires, especially in the 2nd edition era. If you play the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons, you see that there are some differences in the approach of vampires. But this video can be a useful source of information or even inspiration to create new and more dangerous enemies for your campaign. We will now explore the origin, necrology, feeding habits, social relation, and the mind of the vampires. Are you ready? So, let's dig deeper into the secrets revealed by Jander Sunstar about his cursed kind, and take a look on the old and worn copy of the book written by the famous scholar and monster hunter Rudolf von Richten. Hour of the Raven. In almost all worlds and cultures, there are legends about vampires, undead who rise from their graves, maintaining their vigor and strength to feed on the blood of the living. But where does the vampire curse come from? If new vampires are always created by another vampire, how did this bloodthirsty horror and many bloodlines of cursed undead creatures begin? The legends about the origins of vampirism vary between several cultures and worlds. In the world of Grimm, aquatic elves believe that if one of them is buried in the land, he will rise as a vampire. In the world of Oert, legends tell about the terrible fate of Cass, a powerful knight who served as a general of Vecna's army until he betrayed his master, and by unexpected consequences of his act, became a bloodthirsty undead creature. In the world of Faerun, legends point that original vampires may emerge when a succubus drains a victim's life through a deadly kiss. Von Richten believed that the curse of vampirism originated with Count Strahd von Zarovich. His studies indicated that Count Strahd was not transformed into a vampire by another creature of the night, but had stolen his immortality through a dark pact with an entity he believed to be death itself. We know, however, that this conception is a mistake. Evidence points to the existence of vampires much older than Count Strahd, like the elven vampire Jander Sunstar, turned into an undead creature almost 400 years before the Count. Perhaps vampirism does not have a single origin. There are many reports of mortals who actively seek immortality through undeath and dark pacts, or those who have been cursed by the gods to this condition, and so beginning a new lineage of vampires. The body of a vampire no longer maintains its vital functions, and is dead to almost all ends. Although their body is preserved by negative energy, only some of their organs and systems still retain some functionality. Vampires have no need to breathe, and are immune to toxins and poisons. Despite this, there are some allergens that can cause damage to a vampire's body, but this substance can be the most varied, and are usually linked to something in the vampire's past. A vampire's stomach is usually shrunk to the size of a closed fist and has no functionality. Most vampires cannot feed like a mortal and cannot ingest any food or drink, and their diet is restricted only to blood. Vampires still have a functioning circulatory system, and the creature's hearts still pump blood through their bodies. The vampiric blood, when drawn from their body, has supernatural properties. The blood is thick and have a dark red color, but when placed against the light, it shows a distinct golden color. Sometimes, the blood may have acid properties and may become explosive in contact with sunlight. In rare cases, those that come in direct contact with the blood can become charmed and influenced by the undead monster. When the vampire is destroyed, however, all samples of his blood immediately lose power and quickly become rancid. The vampire's sensory organs are very enhanced by their transformation. Their eyes can see in total dark, and they have improved hearing, smell, and touch. A vampire body never age and are always preserved as they were at the time of their death. Its appearance will only degenerate and become paler and bestial if the creature goes through long periods without feeding on blood. A vampire has fangs, and his teeth are more pointed and wider than normal. The fangs are retractable, and although they are usually slightly protruding, they elongate at the moment of feeding or rage. The vampire uses these fangs to open small wounds, where they sip and drain the blood of their victims. The neck is a common place for such wounds, as it is usually exposed, but the wrist or even the groin are places that are very targeted by such creatures, due to the good blood flow. Experienced vampires are usually careful when feeding, to not drain their victims of all their blood, and thus create another inexperienced vampire in the process. If a vampire wishes to act brutally, he can tear his victim's throat with a bite, quickly sipping a large amount of blood, but wasting most of it. Vampires usually feed on mortal humanoids, while they are still alive and preferably defenseless. In extreme situations, they can also feed on recent corpses, but retrieve very little blood without a beating heart on the cadaver. Feeding on the blood of animals is also possible, but they have a rancid and unsatisfactory taste. Most of the victims of a vampire's bite do not remember the feeding act and describe the encounter with the creature as something pleasant and painless. Although blood is the most common source of nourishment for vampires, there are some special types of vampires that can obtain sustenance in other ways. Some reports point to the existence of vampires that feed on brain fluids, water from the body, or even some that devour the brain or the heart of their victims as cannibals. Others seem to feed directly on energies, draining their victims with their touch, feeding on life experience, memories, or even physical attributes, until their victims become a weak and empty shell. Vampires who have recently fed can pass as a living creature if not closely examined, but hungry vampires start to look more and more like a corpse, with pale skin and feral looks. These creatures usually fed once per night, but this can also vary from vampire to vampire, depending on the age or type of the undead creature. Vampires can drink blood from other vampires. This type of blood, called the king nectar, gives a greater and more powerful sustenance, but most vampires reject such source of nourishment. There are some vampires, however, who develop a taste for king nectar, and who actively hunt other vampires to applicate their thirst. When a vampire drinks another vampire's blood, they create a mental bond that lasts for a few days, and the vampire who drank the blood of his kindred can send telepathic orders to the other vampire, who will have to obey him. During daytime, vampires must hide from the sun. Some vampires also enter a deep coma, the sleep of the dead. A vampire's behavior during this period cannot be easily predicted. Some vampires at sunrise go into a deep coma and are absolutely immobile, like a stiff corpse into the daylight period. Others go into a state of mild drowsiness and are lethargic, but still able to act if awakened. Some rare specimens, however, do not require any rest and remain fully active during daytime, although hidden from the dangerous sunlight. Most vampires need some soil from their homeland in their resting places. This symbolic connection with their past can be replaced by another item or object that reminds them of their previous existence as a mortal. The reason for such demands are a mystery to the scholars, but they must have some connection with the psychology of these murderous beasts. Traditionally, a vampire is created when a victim is completely drained of blood by another vampire. Experienced vampires are very careful not to drain their victims to death, to prevent unwanted and unexperienced offspring that can expose them to the living world. When a poor soul dies in this way, and his body is not properly cared for, he will wake up in the grave a few days after his death. Most of these recent created undead remember the agony of death and the face of their creator, and instinctively deduce what they had become. If abandoned by their creators, they must then dig their way out of their graves, or perish in eternal hunger and agony. Some reports point to a rare species of a vampire whose saliva is extremely poisonous and can pass the vampiric curse to those that are bitten by such creatures. The contaminated victims slowly get sick until they perish and rise like another vampire in a few days. There are also some vampires who can pass their condition to others through a curse that slowly drains their victim's strength. The only way to prevent the death of a person cursed in this way is to defeat the vampire who casted the curse on him. The evil and corrupt nature of their souls and their predatory and bestial instinct makes the vampires lonely creatures. Some, however, take some pleasure in relating with other vampires and form societies, albeit short-lived. Most relationships between vampires, however, occur as a relationship of domination between masters and servants. Newly created vampires are initially slaves to their masters, and for a few days they are unable to resist their commands, as if under the effect of a powerful suggestion spell. Over time, some vampires begin to develop a greater willpower and may try to resist these commands, but for many years they still have difficulty resisting the presence and command of their masters, as if charmed. Sometimes, the loneliness of a vampire existence led them to create a bride or a groom. In the process of creating a bride, the vampire drinks the blood of his chosen one. The vampire drinks the blood of her chosen one until she is on the verge of death by blood loss. He then tears a cut in his skin and feeds his victim with his own blood. The taste of blood awakens an extraordinary thirst and the victim compulsively drinks the offered blood until it must be forcibly removed. She then goes into a deep coma and after a few minutes dies. However, hours later, the victim emerges as a bride or groom to his creator. Vampires created in this way are not slaves to their master's will, but are still extremely dependent on their creators while they are still inexperienced. These vampires share a telepathic link and can mentally communicate for miles. They are also able to feel when their partner is subject to strong emotions. The relationship between these vampires can be marked by strong passion, but the evil, bestial, and selfish nature of these creatures often turns into unhealthy, possessive, and violent relationships. It can quickly be transformed into hate or contempt. The consequence of this bond can be extremely dangerous to a vampire. If one of them is put to final death and destruction, the other will suffer a great damage, while the link between them is abruptly disrupted and will be seriously injured and weakened. If they so wishes, the bond between these two vampires can also be voluntarily broken. Although it is more common for vampires to create brides or grooms of the opposite sex, it's not unusual for this type of companion to be of the same sex of his creator, and there is no restriction for such a relationship, which depends only on the vampire master and creator preference and desire. The mind of a vampire undergoes major changes from when he was alive. Bestial hunger, supernatural powers, and the prospect of immortality causes major changes in the way of thinking of these undead creatures. Most vampires are evil and cruel, and even if they are good and benevolent at the time of their transformation, they end up slowly degenerating their morals. Mortals who actively seek immortality through undeath, or that have become vampire by divine curses, are usually already evil before their transformation, but the poor souls transformed against their will are not, initially at least, monsters in their behavior. Some have their minds shattered by the traumatic events of their death. Many of these new created vampires are also corrupted by their own vampire masters, and over time and the necessity of blood feeding and killing, lose all empathy with other mortal creatures. However, there are some reports of vampires who by an extraordinary willpower manage to resist these impulses and keep aspects of their personalities intact. These vampires, like our ally Jander Sunstar, are extremely rare. The vampire's psychology also tends to evolve over time. The first phase of a vampire, in their first years of existence, they are marked by a great excitement and dark delight. These creatures are still discovering the limits of their powers and senses, and they are exulting from new experiences. A change of behavior often occurs when the vampire begins to expose and discover his vulnerabilities. Usually when a vampire ends up revealing his existence and attracting the unwanted attention of mortals and hunters who want their destruction. The vampires who survive this first encounter end up developing a paranoia and hatred toward mortals, but also discover that they are powerful killing machines. They then evolve to the next stage, where they are brutal and cruel predators. In this phase, which usually lasts a few decades, they feed voraciously, killing several victims each night, and drinking blood even when they are not thirsty. During this period, some vampires end up creating their first vampire spawn, which results that are often disastrous. After decades at this stage, vampires are often struck by loneliness and boredom. Some vampires seek to integrate themselves into society again, living a dangerous life of facade among mortals. Others, perhaps unable to integrate themselves into mortal society, escalate dramatically in their cruelty, becoming mass murderers and terrorizing entire cities and kingdoms with their cruel games. Vampires that survive this dangerous phase of existence usually reach maturity around 100 years of existence. Vampires at this age tend to become more cautious, abandoning the risks that result from compulsive destruction of mortals, and adopting multiple refuges and lairs. These vampires usually consolidate their power bases, carefully choosing new vampires to transform, and also mortal and bestial servants. To combat the boredom of their existence, vampires often develop elaborate tastes. Some engage in intricate political plots, or elaborate hunting games. Others began to appreciate and collect works of art and literature. Some vampires have dangerous political agendas and come to control large areas of influence, while others dedicate themselves to the study of magic and occult, becoming even more dangerous. Regardless of their stage of life, vampires are endowed with a great ego and vanity. In addition, a factor that commonly affects the minds of vampires is insanity, and sometimes a vampire's mind is shattered by the horror of his existence. An insane undead can be quite dangerous, but these creatures' existence are often shortened by the unwanted attention they attract. It's not uncommon that vampires of great age, in the face of boredom and the emptiness of their existence, go through long periods of hibernation. A vampire who voluntarily wishes to enter this state seeks a secure refuge and hideout, and enter in a coma, sleeping for decades or even centuries. During this period, their body deteriorates from lack of blood, and almost nothing can wake them from their sleep. The process of awakening is usually slow, and even after they finally become conscient again, it takes a few days for a vampire to get up and move, once again thirsty for blood and new experiences. As we unravel the secrets of the thirsty undead, night falls on our camp, and the newly discovered terrors awaken new fears in our fevered minds. Do not despair, my companions, and stay focused on our purpose. Subscribe to this channel and activate the notifications, and soon we will discover the powers and weakness of these creatures of the night, and how to hunt and destroy them.